So Healdsburg definitely has its fair share of high-end developments, whether it's Mill District, whether it's Montage, and now North Village. But what we're seeing increasingly are, particularly in some of the downtown areas, as well as in rural Healdsburg, are homes being knocked down to build high-end custom homes. And if you've driven around like rural Healdsburg or in the downtown area, you'll almost certainly have seen signs for Fairweather Construction. And they're one of the best and most respected high-end custom builders in Sonoma County. And some of the homes that they build, they're just absolutely beautiful. So I'm excited to be here with Simon Fairweather today. I'm actually interviewing him in his factory in Santa Rosa. And we're going to talk about some of the things that you need to think about if you're thinking about either buying a lot or buying a home to knock it down to build a high-end custom home. And what are some of the things you need to think about so that you don't end up like one of those people who purchases a lot and then gets so far down the journey and then realizes that you can't afford to build and you never end up realizing your dream. Welcome, Simon. Glad to be able to join you here. Maybe just talk a little bit about how you got into the business and a bit about your background.
Sure. We've been in business for 33 years. We've been located in Sonoma County the entire time. We work primarily in Sonoma County, but also do some work in Napa and Marin County as well. So our business has been focused for the last 20 years or so on building new custom homes, mostly on rural properties.
So there's a lot of people, we go around Healdsburg, we see a lot of, new construction, obviously see a lot of your signs, both in downtown Healdsburg as well as in rural Healdsburg. A lot of people have their dream of, buying a lot or buying a piece of property to sort of knock it down and build their custom home. Mm-hmm. What are some of the things that people should think about when they're thinking about buying a piece of property to build their dream home?
Probably the biggest factor is understanding what the development cost will be for the land itself. In addition to the cost of building a home, we have to consider what the infrastructure costs will be when developing rural property. And that's really your true cost of the property, is the property purchase itself plus the additional infrastructure costs.
And those infrastructure costs, they vary very widely, don't they? Because obviously if you've got a downtown property, say in downtown Healdsburg, or you've got a rural property, obviously a rural property you've got all things like septic systems and and maybe just talk me through a little bit of the differences that people need to think about when they're looking at rural versus downtown.
The main thing to remember is that if you're on rural property, you're essentially providing your own utility infrastructure, whether that's power, gas, water, or a sewer system or a septic system. And I would say that the biggest factors to be aware of are, first of all, water and septic. You must buy a property that is able to support a septic system, and you must buy a property that has an adequate water supply on it. The county regulates both of these things, and getting the data on those two pieces is absolutely critical before closing escrow on a piece of rural land.
And I think you need, it's like 1.5 gallons per minute per structure, something like that.
Actually, 1 gallon per minute per dwelling.
Okay, yes. 1 gallon per minute per dwelling.
Dwelling. So if you have a main house and an ADU, you need to prove 2 gallons of water per minute. And the rules, I should point out, the rules are somewhat different in different areas of the county. There's a higher level of testing requirement, particularly in areas of West County where these are considered water scarce areas.
And then again, septic systems, I know they're probably one of the most important things that, we talk to clients about, particularly if they're buying a piece of property that has never been developed before, making sure that you've got the ability to put in a septic system, because not all lots can accept a septic system.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And primarily the issue there is going to be, first of all, will the property support a septic system? And then secondly, if it will, how many bedrooms will it support? Septic systems are designed by number of bedrooms in the home. And there are properties that will literally only support a 1-bedroom septic system. There are other properties that you could put a 10-bedroom septic system on. So you want to know the scale of house you want to build, how many bedrooms and bathrooms it might have, most importantly, how many bedrooms, and then you want to make sure that that capacity is available on that property for that size of septic system.
Whereas obviously in a downtown setting, I know you've got a couple of projects in downtown,
Mm-hmm.
then all you really need to think about, is there anything you need to think about particularly when it comes to utilities? You've got sewer, you've got electricity.
Right. Probably the main thing in town is that even though you can connect to you're going to connect to the sewer system, you probably still want to have an idea of how much that connection is going to cost. the costs come in two forms. One form is the actual connection fee from the city, and the second part of that is going to be how much money does it cost to get the sewer pipe from the property out into the street and connected to the sewer line. So there's a practical part, the construction part of it, and there's also the fees to the city as well. So, but at least you know if you're buying a lot in the city that you can make the connection and that piece of it's taken care of. Typically working in a city or an urban environment, power and water are not going to be a problem. Those are also just going to be connection fees. Whereas again, back to rural property, those are big factors in determining the cost and the practicality of building on a rural property.
And the other big factor, which I think a lot of people maybe don't sort of think about in terms of how much it might cost, is if you're buying a piece of property where you need to get a driveway, considerable distance, then driveways don't come cheap.
They don't. I mean, driveways may start at less than $100,000, but could easily go to several million dollars, depending on a couple of factors. One would be the length of the driveway. That's certainly probably the biggest factor. But soil types are another issue, and that's a kind of a deeper dive into soils engineers. But driveways are a huge cost component in developing rural property. It's also worth noting that not every rural property will accept a driveway that will meet the fire codes in this county. So there's some nuances to that as well. But the bottom line is you have to be able, there are limits to slope steepness, and you also have to have turnouts and turnarounds for fire trucks as well. So it is possible to be looking at a piece of property that is for sale, but it cannot actually support the driveway requirements, and that's something to avoid, obviously.
So you touched on soils there, and that's obviously important, particularly building a bigger driveway. But soils are also really important when it comes to actual foundations and the relative potential cost of foundations, isn't it?
Absolutely. Foundation costs can double depending on the soil types, from 1 to 2x. Probably the biggest factor, there's two big factors in terms of soil. One is the makeup of the soil itself. Probably the biggest enemy in terms of cost is clay. If we find that we've got expansive clay soils, then there's a lot of remediation work that needs to be done. And then the other factor would be, has anybody moved soil around on the property previously? If there are any fills that have been done, either cuts or fills that have been done previously, that work may need to be redone if it wasn't done with the involvement of a civil engineer and a soils engineer.
So we've talked a little bit about utilities, and people think about electricity, water, sewer, and gas and propane. But I think today one of the biggest thing that people always need to think about, and particularly people in the Bay Area, is internet. And that used to be a real problem, but I think that's got a little bit better, hasn't it?
It's gotten better, definitely. And so we had various options in rural locations. I mean, the first choice is always to have a wired broadband connection. If Comcast or Sonic can serve the property, that's fantastic. That's your best bet. If those things aren't available, it used to be that our only options were either a satellite dish or a conventional satellite dish or a line of sight connection, and both of those are slow, unreliable connections. The big change that you're referring to, of course, is Starlink, and the fact that with a Starlink dish, it's now possible to get high-speed broadband internet delivered from a satellite source. The one thing to keep in mind, though, is the fact that you still need a fairly large view of the sky from wherever your Starlink dish is. So if you were in a heavily wooded environment, that could still be challenging to use a Starlink connection.
And if I've got a Starlink box in my garage at the moment, I'm just about to move house myself into the sort of more rural place, and so I'll be interested to see how that Starlink actually works. So I'll report back on that. So we've spoken a little bit about the infrastructure and what you need to think about when you're buying a lot. But now let's get into the sort of the meat and potato of it. Thinking about starting the process. I know certainly when I'm working with clients, one of the first things they do is, I need to talk to an architect and start having those conversations. But I think it'd be good to get your perspective on when should somebody really start thinking about the contractor side of it, and should they be thinking about talking to a contractor even before they purchase the property?
I would highly recommend talking to a contractor that's experienced in developing rural property before buying land. This is a service that we offer to potential clients because it's just so important to be matching the client's aspirations and budget to the property and the development costs, and ultimately to the cost of building a house as well. I can't overemphasize the importance of getting some feedback on cost and practical development issues before purchasing a piece of property. I should also say that architects are also often can be well versed at this, but some more than others. So if you are relying on an architect to advise you, it's really important to make sure you're working with an architect that has experience in developing rural properties. I would say one of the things that we run into from time to time is that somebody has involved an architect who's mostly worked in urban environments and doesn't actually understand the requirements of developing rural property, and that can be that can have some unfortunate consequences.
It's great that somebody like Simon, with his experience, has a service whereby they will visit a property prior to the close of escrow, because there's just so many factors, and then that's why you see so many lots for sale. It's because people get so far down the journey, and then for whatever reason it doesn't work out. So anything that you can do to try and avoid that happening to you has to be a good thing. So that's great to hear. So the other part of the process, obviously, people consult with an architect. So at what point can you start to have a meaningful conversation with a client about costs?
That can happen as soon as we've identified a potential piece of property. So in fact, often what we'll do is we may look at several pieces of property with a potential client, and once they focus in on a piece of property that seems like it'll serve their needs, then we'll often do what we call a one-page budget, where we go in and we try to identify the likely cost of development of the property. Then we'll also look at the cost of buildings as a per square foot basis, and we'll develop a rough budget for the client to try to see whether or not the budget that they have in mind for the entire project is going to work well on that piece of property. So that's the point at which I feel like we can be of the most help, so that we've sort of sized up the property, the budget, and the client before they've gone too far down the design road with an architect.
And do you need sort of schematics from the architect in order to put that one-page budget together, or you can just do it off the back of a conversation, and if the client gives you an idea of what it is they're looking for, you can work from that?
We don't need a schematic design for that. We can actually just do it through conversationally. So we're going to ask questions like, how many bedrooms do you envision the house having? How many square feet? Do you need an accessory dwelling unit? Are you going to build a pool house? Is there going to be a pool itself? What are the other amenities that you'd like to have on the property? And then what we do is we take that entire list and we put rough numbers to each one of those items, and then that allows us to present a budget that somebody can use. And bringing that budget to an architect is incredibly valuable, because it will help to start the process off correctly with the architect in terms of aligning budget and project.
And you've built, I've seen some of the homes that you've built. I mean, the most beautiful homes you could ever imagine. I mean, what are some of the things that people should think about in their home that was sort of where costs can get carried away? I mean, are there some sort of simple guidelines that you can give? It's like, don't go down this route because it's going to cost you an absolute fortune, or vice versa?
It's a great question, but there are a lot of nuanced answers to that. I mean, maybe the obvious one would be to say that obviously the cost of finishes and fixtures are going to take the cost of any home, and if you put more expensive things into it, then you're going to have a more expensive home. The costs of structure are fairly similar from home to home, but there are, again, nuances there as well. The bigger the door openings, the taller the roof and the ceilings, that will affect structural cost. Probably one of the biggest factors is siting the home, meaning where does a home go on the property? Obviously, putting a home on a piece of flat land is probably the least expensive thing to do. Perching a house on the edge of a cliff is a much more expensive proposition and requires a completely different kind of foundation. So it's a great question, but there are a lot of, again, nuanced answers to that question. And it's part of what we do when we're doing these early budgets is we try to understand, from maybe referencing other houses or magazine articles, we try to understand what the level of quality and sophistication the client's looking for, and then we're trying to then match sort of size, quality to the budget.
So you can't say that a modern home, steel, glass, concrete, is necessarily going to cost more than a traditional home if the finish levels are the same.
That's correct. Yeah, there's not a giant difference between a traditional home and a more modern structure or contemporary structure. it probably really comes down more to the finishes, the level of finishes and features that are within that home. Just as an example, something that's become more and more popular is putting in a conditioned wine storage feature into a home. And once upon a time, that might have been a closet or a room down in the basement, but more and more that's becoming a thing that's in the living or dining space. So we're doing these glass boxes that are conditioned for wine display and storage. That feature alone can cost over $100,000. So when I talk about finishes and fixtures and features, it's these accoutrements that have become more and more commonplace really do drive the cost of a home. And we need to understand what the client's expectation is in terms of what they want to have in their home.
So we're standing in Simon's facility here in Santa Rosa, and right behind me here are prefabricated walls which are going to be taken up to Healdsburg as part of building a custom home in the downtown area. And I know it's certainly one of the things that Simon's really passionate about is how can you use prefabrication to both improve the quality and the efficiency of building. So how did you first end up sort of thinking about getting into prefabricating certain components?
Well, it probably came about for two reasons. The first reason would be that after about 10 years of pretty much exclusively building custom modern homes, I came to the conclusion that our processes were not nearly as efficient as they should be. We wasted more time and more material than I was really comfortable with, and I just felt like there had to be a better way. I was well aware that both in the United States and in Europe, there's quite a lot of prefabrication that goes on. Prefabrication comes in a number of forms. It can be panelization, which is what we do here. It can also come as modules. It can come as completely pre-assembled homes for smaller homes, like an ADU unit that would sort of be on a trailer, so a modular home. And for the type of work that we do, we found that prefabrication of parts and pieces, and in this case, wall panels, was the most efficient solution for us to improve our process. With this solution, we've actually been able to reduce the waste lumber from this process down to less than 1%. We throw away less than 1% of what we purchase to frame a home. That's very different from industry standards.
And pays a huge contribution to the overall sustainability of a home as well, just being more efficient in the use of materials.
Absolutely. This process also allows us to hold schedules more tightly because of the fact that when we can do more work in an indoor environment like this, it doesn't matter how hot it is, it doesn't matter if it's pouring rain, the project can be moving forward and then basically landing these parts on the job site quickly between weather events allows for a faster build schedule and of course then also lowers cost of the project as well.
And it's interesting, I recently saw a delivery of a Connect home, and prefab homes have got a bad rap, and for good reason in many ways, because the quality of something like a Connect home is just so far removed from the quality of something that Simon builds, having seen some of his high-end custom homes. So I think it's a really smart way to go about building and improve the overall process from both an efficiency, time delivery, and potentially cost point of view.
I will say that the combination, or what we're trying to hit as a sweet spot here, is that we're doing as much shop fabrication as we possibly can, but all of the finishes, whether they be exterior finishes or interior finishes, all go into the home in the traditional way. So if you walk through one of our homes where we've used prefabrication, you would never know the difference between that home and a home that was built one stick at a time at the site, a high quality one stick at a time home. So that's what we're trying to do, is marry the advantages of off-site fabrication with the custom work expected from an on-site custom build.
We've obviously got the walls behind us here, but then it also goes down to prefabricating tiny little details.
Absolutely. And what it really comes down to is the fact that when we're prefabricating, we're forced to use a process method of designing and delivering the home. And what that does is it forces us to look at every aspect of the home. And just, as an example here, when we're fabricating like this, before we ever get to this stage, we've thought about where each towel bar goes in the bathroom, where the medicine chests are going, how the niches go into showers. All of that has been designed into our shop drawings and is all fabricated into our wall assembly. So this is very different from the typical process of sort of working these things out in the field as you go along.
So let's finally talk about the cost of building, and I don't want to talk about dollar per square foot, because it's just a meaningless number without some sort of real context. So how should clients think about their build costs?
Cost per square foot has a place in this entire process, but that place is really at the earliest stages of the project, where we're trying to put together rough budgets. Once we get past rough budgets and we get into schematic design, we're really looking at the specifics of the project, and we move on past the cost per square foot metric for a house. We're looking at the specifics of the design of the home, but just as importantly, we're also looking again at the other features that are going on the property, whether it's paving, it's a swimming pool, a pool house, landscaping, all of those things, and all of those things are significant contributors to the cost. So again, cost per square foot can work at the earliest stages for just creating budgets for a project, but as soon as we get into a specific project, then we want to get much more specific about costs and cost allocation.
And I think, if you talk to a contractor, various different contractors, some contractors will talk about, cost per square foot, but meaning, just literally everything within the four walls. But as you say, by the time you start adding on, a $500,000 driveway, an infinity pool, huge amounts of hardscaping. I mean, that's why these dollar per square foot numbers are so meaningless, because it's like you can include so much or so little in those numbers. So a lot of people, they've got a dream of like building their dream home. But for some people, maybe building their own home isn't the right thing. So there's plenty of homes that you can buy that are already built. So if somebody is thinking about building their own home, I mean, what are some of the things that you would say to them that may make them think twice about it, or may make them realize that, yeah, they're the right type of people to be building a home? Sure.
Here are a couple of things. I think one thing that we all have to acknowledge is that this process takes some time. It's very common to spend 6 months to a year in a design process, and then somewhere between 1 and 2 years building. So first of all, I think that's probably the single biggest factor is that, that going out and purchasing a home that you might be able to move into in 60 days versus literally walking into a project that may go in total from 1.5 years to 3 years before you're moving into your home.
And even longer in some cases.
And you hear stories all the time about even longer.
Yeah.
So and that's also affected by the property selected and how much site development may already be done on that property. If that property already has a driveway and power and a septic system, you might be able to move quite a bit faster on it. If you have to go through all the testing required to qualify the property, that's going to add months to the project. So I think that time is a big factor, both in terms of the elapsed time of the project, but also in terms of your personal time and how much time do you have to sit with your architect and builder and answer a lot of questions and weigh in on a lot of things. It's not uncommon for clients to spend several hours every week or every other week working with their architect and builder for some number of months preparing for a project. So there's a personal time commitment involved as well that is something that absolutely has to be considered.
So, well, thank you for spending time with us today, Simon. It's super interesting to understand a bit about your thought process and how people should think about building their own home, and exciting to be able to come to your facility here in Santa Rosa.
Thank you, David.
So I get calls from people all the time who are looking to either buy a property in Sonoma County or buy a lot in order to build in Sonoma County or Healdsburg or Santa Rosa. So if you are interested in finding out more about what it takes to buy a property or build a property in Sonoma County, in Healdsburg, Windsor, Santa Rosa, then please do get in touch. My details are in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, I'm sure you'll enjoy the next one on screen right now. Until the next video, go well.